I guess my career in automobiles started about the time I was born, because I had always been interested. The minute I could understood what I was looking at, a car was the thing that I enjoyed the most. And I started drawing them at a very, very early age. You know, at 5 years old, you could tell which kind of car that I was drawing, and I labeled it as such. And my parents saved many of those drawings, and it was really the only profession I ever wanted to be in. It was an automobile designer. I didn't know how you did it then, or how you got a job doing that, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. And my father worked for Koppers Corporation, and they were starting a piston ring organization. So if you are selling piston rings, you got to start in Detroit, because that's where all the automotive capital is and all that. And so we moved to Detroit in late 1935. And basically what I remember is Detroit and growing up in the atmosphere of Detroit. One of my first experiences in Detroit was going to the automobile show and seeing the Cord and the Lincoln Zephyr, and they were so beautiful. I said, this is what I want to do. And my dad was very helpful, and he'd take me around the plants, and we'd see the cars early before they came out. And those were happy days. And as far as I was concerned, living in Detroit was just about as close to heaven as you could get. I knew what I wanted to do as a profession, but I didn't know exactly how to get there and what to do. My parents wanted me to have a college education, both of those. They'd graduated from college in 1924, and I wasn't about to be able to go to art school and not get a regular education. So I ended up going to Michigan State the very year that I started, in 1948 there. They started a course that they called industrial design, which was half engineering and half art. And it was just what I wanted. So my career started there in 1948, and eventually when I graduated from Michigan State, I got a job with General Motors, which I was just delighted. The first assignment I had, they had you in an orientation place for 6 months. They checked out if they wanted to keep you or not. And my first assignment was Cadillac Studio, and oh boy, that was just great. You can't imagine what it was like with Cadillac in those days, because they were not only dominating the luxury car market, but they were a hot car. They were the fastest car with that overhead valve Cadillac engine. They had run the year before in Le Mans. Briggs Cunningham campaigned 2 Cadillacs at the race in Le Mans. I mean, it was just a fabulous car to be designing, and I was in seventh heaven. And Mr. Earl wanted to start a special automobile with a Cadillac convertible that had a wraparound windshield like his LeSabre show car. And everybody was busy working on the 54s at that time. And my boss, Ed Glowacki, let me take this assignment on. So the first car that I worked on was the 53 Cadillac Eldorado. So you could imagine how you couldn't wait to get back at work again the next day working on something like that. And I enjoyed that so much. It was just I was in seventh heaven. People were very, very patient with me. You have to really help a new designer when they're first starting. And I must say that they were all very good to me. It was great fun watching Mr. Earl come in and how he got what he wanted, because he couldn't draw. Unlike Bill Mitchell, he was not an artist himself, but he could pick designs well, and he could paint a picture with his mouth, the kind of thing that he was looking for. And then we'd all see how close we could come to getting it, you know. And he was a very, very important figure. You know, he had started styling. Almost everybody that ran Ford or GM, Ford or Chrysler or American Motors at that time had worked for Mr. Earl at GM, because it was really like the school that started automobile designers out from 1928 on. So he was a very important man, and it was very interesting to listen to, and it was a real joy to have the experience of working under him for a few years. I started out in Cadillac Studio, and for a brief period of time, and then I got involved. I had a hitch to do in the Army for 2 years, and I went over to Germany. And it was during that time that I was able to do a lot of automotive things that I'd won on my leave time and weekends, like some of the European auto shows and the races at Nürburgring there in Germany, and it was just fabulous times. It was a heck of an experience. But it was 2 years out of my life at General Motors, and I couldn't wait to get back. Mm-hmm. And when I came back, I worked also for a while in Pontiac and then in Cadillac again. It was about that time that General Motors moved out to the new Tech Center site outside of Detroit. That was 1955 when we moved out there. And we were starting in these beautiful new facilities. It seemed that they were just fabulous compared to the tight, cramped quarters that we had down in this building behind the GM building. We used to take the cars up on the roof to look at them, and now we had a beautiful patio where we could stand out and see them, and an auditorium in the wintertime to look at them. So it was a great deal different atmosphere. And that was about the time I was, moving up a little bit. I became assistant chief designer in Cadillac Studio, and that was about the time that I started to, more really influence the design of some of these cars. I had worked specifically on a little show car back for the shows, the Motoramas. I worked that little El Camino Cadillac coupe, and that was fun. And now I was getting my chance to actually work on the real car. And I did a lot in the 58, but the 59 was the one that I influenced the most. I did the majority of that car, especially those big fins, which I don't know, maybe I'm infamous for that, but it was a lot of fun. That was done in reaction to the 57 Chrysler products that came out a couple of years before that were so dramatic. Mm-hmm. And we were all taken back by that, and we were all out to do the hottest cars you could do. In fact, if you didn't do a hot enough car, you might not stay in that studio very long. They weren't looking for neutral designs. They were looking for hot designs. Mm-hmm. About that time. My design, I had a somewhat of a philosophy of design that is used in industrial design and other things. Less is better. And all the cars that influenced me in my life that I thought were beautiful, like the Accord or like the Zephyr or the Lincoln Continental, they were all pure designs and not reliant on a lot of chrome and all that. And that influenced me very much in my design career. And some of the stuff done in the 50s were not stuff that I necessarily liked. I could do it, but it wasn't what I really liked. I was much closer to Bill Mitchell's design philosophy than Harley Earl's. Mm-hmm. So when he was preaching this type of thing, boy, I was with him. It was what I wanted to do too. And so it was easy to work for Bill and I think this simpatico was with all these young fellows that he had running the studios. We all had some of that feeling. And so I think that's why the designs of the 60s were so much cleaner and more elegant than the designs of the 50s. It's what we really wanted to do. Bill Mitchell had an eye for design like nobody I ever met. He somehow sensed and knew what was right, and he had a feeling for the public that he didn't need to ask anybody. He didn't need to take any clinic or survey. Mm-hmm. And he used to say that as a hat designer, Hattie Carnegie doesn't go down the street asking a lady what kind of hat they want next spring. She designed it, and that's what the woman loved. And that's the way he felt about cars. We'll do the designs. You can't think of it. We'll think of it, and we'll do you something that you'll love. And boy, his batting average through the years was almost unbelievable. And that's one of the reasons all those young designers functioned so well working for him, because he watched over us like a hawk. And if we do something stupid, he'd back us off a little bit. But he had a good eye, and he knew a design, and he knew when it was right, and he had great direction. And it was fun to work for him. I used to enjoy coming into work every day. It was just a delight thinking about what was going to happen that day. When design first started out, virtually nobody knew who did the design of any car. It was the engineers that were all important, and then suddenly they realized as cars started to get a little more sophisticated, and especially around 1933, when cars became streamlined, that they couldn't do it. They needed designers in there to help. And without the deft hand of a good designer, you were in trouble. So it became an important field, and it started gaining importance. It still really wasn't taught in any schools at that time. I know Harley Earl worked very hard to get a school started in New York at Pratt and one in California at Art Center. In fact, he had some of his people that used to be designers working out there at the school trying to get that type of courses started because he needed more people, and it was just that much better if they're well trained. But yeah, everybody talks about designers nowadays. That's a big deal, but not when I started. Nobody even understood who did it or asked. When Gordon Buick did the Cord, he wasn't even asked to go to the auto show in New York. Yeah, it just wasn't important, and that whole car was Gordon Buick, you know. And if it hadn't looked like that, it'd never be still talked about today. Yeah. Mechanically, as interesting as it was, it wouldn't be talked about if it wasn't for the design. And I think that's what Bill Mitchell left a heritage of great designs during the course of his career. As I say, his batting average was unbelievable. And even the one or two things that are controversial are absolutely loved by some people, you know. Mm-hmm. So no, he had a wonderful career at GM, and we were all very fortunate working for him. Although I'm most known for that design of that '59 Cadillac, it isn't necessarily the one that I liked the best. The one that came the second year after the '60 Cadillac, I liked more. But especially the ones I enjoyed working on were the Riviera Buicks, the first and second generation of those. They were really fun to work on, classy cars. And the other ones that I worked on Chevrolet that I enjoyed were the Corvettes, the '63 and the '68s, and those wonderful Camaros. I just enjoyed working on those. And my favorite was the '70 Camaro with the open mouth, the rally sport job. That was a great car. Design, for me, has always been a team effort, especially with the studio setup at General Motors. You relied very heavily on good clay modelers, and some of them, there's almost only one clay modeler that could do a subtle type of surface that you wanted, so they became very valuable employees. Same with engineers. Good engineers that worked well with designers were rare. And we had good engineers working at design staff, but the minute you got out to the division level, it was hard to find somebody that would back you up and help you get a difficult project done. So those became great people to me, and I consider them some of my closest friends, were these engineers that really understood what was going on. Same thing with general managers, the guys that headed the divisions. Some of them didn't know anything. Some of them really didn't know a car from a canoe. And it was difficult to work with them. You could get things done because they just didn't, fortunately, if they didn't get too involved, you could still get a fine car done. But when you had somebody really good, my favorite was Pete Estes. He was a brilliant engineer, and he had a feel for styling, and he loved it, and he made sure his guys sensed that, and that they worked hard when it was a particularly hard project to do. A good example is the saw fronts on the Pontiacs that Pete made sure they got through, which God almighty, if you walk out in the road now, that's the background for every front end of every car in the world now. Without that, we still have those old '70s bumpers sticking out there. So it's a team effort, and working with the engineers and working with the modelers is something I was very proud of. And Bill Mitchell would notice that if you worked well with other people, and that was also important to him because he really had a great group of people working for him. And when he was young, and knew to design and run in Cadillac studio. He was very reliant on some of the people that he was working with. But it is a team effort. What I thought was the culmination of my career was when I was promoted from chief designer of Buick into Chevrolet, where I'd worked before on the Corvettes, but I was an assistant chief designer. Now I was given the title of group chief designer over all the Chevrolet studios, car and truck. And that was fabulous. We had studios where we just did Corvettes and Camaros and other ones for the cars, and two big studios to do these trucks, from pickup trucks right up to heavy duty trucks we did then. And what an interesting project that was. I was in seventh heaven. And right about this time, Pete Estes was put in charge of overseas GM. And he wanted me personally to come over there and take over the design work at Opel, which was going to be doing more and more of the work for other parts of General Motors. And I really didn't want to. You know, I was happy. How could I have a better assignment than what I got? But Bill Mitchell told me, he said, that's the one thing in my career I wish I'd done. I wish I'd worked overseas in Europe for a while. Because I think there's the feel of what goes on over there that is so exciting and different that I wish I had done that. And Dave, I want you to think about it. I won't make you do it if you don't want to. The fact that Pete Estes wants you so bad, he's twisting my arm. I don't want that to influence you either, you know. But sooner or later, I was over at Opel, and Opel was a wonderful assignment. It really was. It was working with different people, and those talented German engineers were they tough to get on your side. But once they really trusted you, they were terrific people, and I enjoyed it. The design staff at Opel had people from about 30 countries there. So it was really an international deal, and great fun, and doing great cars. And it was worth it for 4 years to drive on the Autobahn 120 miles an hour to work every day and still live through it. That was a small miracle in itself. We always worked on our own designs over there, but you always were helping the previous designers get his work into production, and Chuck Jordan was over there before me, and little Mantas had just come out about the time that I do it. They were sold here in America at Buick dealerships for a while. Good, nice little car, good looking car. And they had just come out, and we were doing a new Commodore series of cars, which were even better. And so it was my responsibility to get those cars into production. And not letting anything screw up. So it was kind of a mutual assignment there. We worked with our predecessors on that, and the fellow that was to follow me, Henry Haga, followed me. He did the same thing with my designs. I did a second generation Manta, and we started the Opel Senator, which is the first big Opel sedan over there. And maybe the most fun was the Bitter car, which was a German sports car with, as Eric told it, I don't want it to look German, maybe have a little spaghetti about it. So it had a little touch of Italian to it. We made that in limited production down at Stuttgart at the Bauer Custom Bodybuilder. And made about 300 of them. But that was a wonderful car and a lot of fun to drive. And I had one of those for about 6 months over there in Europe. And it was great. It had the Diplomat engine and suspension in it. It was a beautiful combination. It had a high-performance Chevrolet Corvette engine in it, which was done specially for Europe with special bearings and valves because of this sustained 130, 140 mile-an-hour speeds that were driven, and a DTO independent rear suspension, which was fabulous. Very expensive, but very, very forgiving suspension. The wheels always were vertical, never at an angle. So it was a great car to drive. I always wanted to hope they'd bring it in America because I would love to head one over here to drive around. I worked at Opel from 1970 until 1974. I was supposed to work 3 years till 73, and to get some of the projects done, they asked me to stay another year which I gladly did. But I was ready to come back then. Otherwise, there's other people that needed to have the overseas training, and Bill was very careful to select good people to go over there for limited periods of time, so that would be a training base for people. And it worked out successfully, and he sold that program with overseas, because we were the only ones where the person stayed for a 3-year period of time. Ended up being a 4-year period of time for myself and my people that worked after me. But they were happy with the program, and the people that worked over there were happy with the program. And it became a juicy plum if you were assigned to Opel after that. That was like saying, you're the best designer now. You're the one that's going to go to Opel. Bill Mitchell's career started quite early. It was centered around both art and the automobile. His dad was a Buick dealer, and also owned a lot of exotic cars at the time, Stutz Bearcats, and cars that influenced Bill very much. And he ended up with a job at Collier's, which was a current magazine, about the same type of magazine as Saturday Evening Post it was at the time. Collier Brothers owned a magazine and an advertisement agency, and Bill used to be an illustrator for them. Did a number of ads, a lot of excellent Packard ads were Bill's work. But the most important part was that the Collier Brothers raced cars, and it started a new organization that was actually to become the Sports Car Club of America. And they had a lot of land up in New York State, and they put a track in this land, and they'd race on weekends. And everybody saw Bill's sketches around his desk, and they invited him up to come up to the races with them. And at that point on, he was stuck. He loved racing and cars, and he drew pictures. And one of the pictures of one of these cars racing at you, what became the logo for the racing club, and it was the first emblem of the Sports Car Club of America. Well, that was merely the start. Everybody realized that Bill was being wasted doing what he was doing, and even the Collier brothers, who knew Harley Earl, finally arranged for an interview with him in Detroit, and they were very much pleased with his work. It was so dramatic compared to the stiff side views that most of the designers at the time were doing. These dramatic sketches of cars blasting at you. It assured him a job before he ever got there. Shortly after Bill started at GM, Harley Earl had devised this new type of setup where they would have a studio for each car. And Pontiac and Oldsmobile, Buick, Cadillac all had a separate studio. It's the first time this had been done. And Bill was chosen to run Cadillac Studio, which was quite a feather in his cap, because that was a very important car to Harley Earl. You know, he started his work at General Motors doing a LaSalle for Cadillac Corporation. So he wasn't about to turn on anything that wasn't a good-looking car for Cadillac, and Bill got that job. He did the 60 Special after that, and a number of great cars, and Bill's career was on its way. Bill really respected Mr. Earl. He did more than respect him. He idolized him. And he wanted to do a good job for Mr. Earl, no matter what it was. And when he was given the job of running the corporation styling by Harley Earl, he was the only one to ever do that other than Harley Earl. Harley Earl had done this from 1927 till 1959. So he was a one-man show. And when Bill took over, he felt like he was getting in awful big boots. And he sat in that chair, in that big chair in that office out at the New Tech Center, and he felt so small in that chair he couldn't believe it. He had the chair adjusted, he kept adjusting it, so it sat taller. Harley Earl was 6'5". So, but it didn't matter what height Bill was. He was an excellent successor and did a great job, and Harley Earl was very proud of Bill Mitchell. Incidentally, when Harley Earl left, it was a marvelous transition. He knew how powerful he was, and he knew how intimidating he could be. So when he left, he said, "I want you to take over 100%, and I've got a contract with GM. I come back and see your stuff once a year." And he never came back except for that once-a-year visit, and he was, very much delighted with what he saw. So it was a very, very, very good transition between these two people. Bill Mitchell was in a transition era from the 50s when Mr. Earl dominated design there. And the 50s were a flamboyant era, there's no doubt about it, and cars from that era are much sought after and all that. They're bright and they're colorful and they're chromy, but that wasn't what Bill wanted. Bill wanted an era of exquisite, tasteful cars, and he had to gradually merge into that from the Harley Earl era. Harley was toward the end content to decorate whatever shape it was, and Bill was never that way. He wanted to have the whole shape complete. And a strange thing happened. It was just about this time that the '57 Chryslers came out, the forward look. And those cars were so dramatic that everybody got a feel of they could understand what all of us designers were sketching and doing. And when Mr. Earl was away in Europe for 2 weeks, every car in every studio had an alternate car that the studio was doing over and above this rather bulbous thing that was looked like the '58s, Buicks and Hollses, and every studio had a special car. And Bill worked with us on that and helped sell Mr. Earl on this new school of design. So he was absolutely instrumental in getting those cars out. Even though they were a little in excess of what Bill thought was exactly right, he still knew it'd have to be that dramatic to outdo those Chrysler products. And especially in Cadillac, who invented the fin, no less to have these young, new kid on the block doing a fin that outdid a Cadillac. That just wasn't going to happen. But as he went into the '60s, he got the things he really wanted and developed these beautiful, tasteful cars like the Riviera, the Grand Prix. Even the Stingray Corvette was an exotic shape. It wasn't relying on any trim. And that was the Bill Mitchell era, and all the designers were 100% with him and enjoyed it. It was like he knew he had his direction set. He was like a freight train going through. If you could hang on, you're on for the ride. If you couldn't, you weren't. The '63 Corvette Stingray is one of the major accomplishments of Bill Mitchell. And I don't think a lot of people realize that car started out from a race car that he had developed. There was a Sebring Corvette, SS Corvette, that was unsuccessful down there, and General Motors, although it had terrific potential, it wasn't successful, only lasted a few laps before it blew up. And General Motors was very unhappy about anybody racing at that time. So he kind of inherited that chassis, and he got it for $1 or whatever it was to make it a legitimate thing. And it was on that car that he started designing on his own a new racing car that wasn't to look like anything in the world. The last thing in the world he wanted that to look like was a Ferrari or a Maserati. He wanted something new, and this severe, sharp shape that went around that car. That was all Bill's concept. He directed a lot of wonderful designers working on this project, and it was a real jewel of a project to work on, and a number of people did. But that was all Bill Mitchell. It was his direction, and he was the guy that was responsible for that design right straight through to production. I worked on the later models, and the actual one that went in production, and other than the wheels and bumpers, I'd never say anything about that car it being my design, because it wasn't. It was Bill Mitchell's. And that was one thing he, to the end, wanted to do it, styling. You would come in and show him something on a Corvette, and before he'd get in the room, he'd say, "Listen, don't flatter yourself on these Corvettes, kid. That's the one car I do around here." They give all these guys too much credit. It's just sickening to me. And other engineers did things that Zorro was off the car for a while. And completely. And I was so concerned when I started running Chevrolet that nobody was working on the Corvettes. And the car was a brand new body in 1968, and nothing was wrong. Oh, I knew better than that. Something all new and nothing's wrong means nobody's working on it. Yeah. And I finally got Pete to put Zorro back in charge, and then things started rolling again, because there was somebody that loved his project and was working hard on the engineering of the car. Styling was done, but the engineering wasn't. The split window on the '63 Corvette was something that Bill really loved because it carried the center line of the car right through the shape. You could see it all. But it was not well accepted by engineering or some of the first people driving the cars because it absolutely obliterated your vision. And the engineers hated it for that, and the Corvette drivers that were a little faster than usual didn't like it so much either because there was an awful lot of cops that got caught in that middle thing and they didn't see them. So it was bad for rear visibility. It only lasted 1 year, just '63. But he always lamented that going. We mentioned earlier on the '63 Corvette, which I think was as close as any car ever was to Bill's heart, but there was other ones. The Riviera, that was one that he really loved. He visualized the Riviera as his personalized Rolls-Royce Ferrari. It had the heart of a Ferrari with the razor edge creases of a Rolls-Royce. And it was originally to be called a LaSalle, which is the first car that started its styling. And those little grills in the front fender were to give it a taste of that LaSalle. It never did become a LaSalle, but those grills remained. And that was a car that he always loved. We made a custom one for him. And we chopped the roof down a little lower and lengthened the hood and the point of the front, you know. And it just was a little different, but it looked so good. And he'd let me drive that home on weekends sometimes, and I felt like I was really something. Well, he wanted every division to have something special. And here was these beautiful Corvettes and Chevrolet, and even the little Corvairs were little works of art. And despite what Ralph Nader thought. And Pontiac, he worked on these Grand Prix, these beautiful Grand Prix cars were the one that he made sure Pontiac always had in their stable. Oldsmobile, the Toronado, eventually. You know, we were talking about the Corvette as a specialty car. Bill really wanted to make sure every division had something very special in it. And sometimes it depended on the corporate management at the time from the division, how enthusiastic they were, how much they got. But if you'll remember from the '60s, Chevrolet always had a beautiful Corvette, and even the little Corvairs were little jewels. And Bill personally was the guy that made the little Monza versions with bucket seats, the first bucket seats, and exciting, and they finally had turbocharged engines in them. And it really led to the Mustang, who finally outdid the Corvair. But it was the emphasis of those little Monza Corvairs that started that Mustang program. And then Pontiac always had the Grand Prix from 1962 on. It was this cleaned up B-body car that was really a unique car for Pontiac. Oldsmobile eventually got the Toronado. Buick had the Riviera, and Cadillac had this new Eldorado and they started in '53, and then later in the '67s was that all-new bodied car, which was really a beauty. Those were cars that Bill was very proud of. Usually, when you showed Bill a new design, it was wise just to let him walk in and just digest it, because I remember trying to sell him a design too hard, and he told me, he says, "Listen, kid, if the design's good enough, it'll sell itself." Bill had a wonderful personality and a terrific sense of humor, and he was never at a loss for words, and he'd usually leave you roaring with laughter. And he actually, a lot of situations that were very serious ended up with a lighthearted laugh, and Bill usually got his way. I remember there was one when he had worked all the time in the '60s to get the big cars the way he wanted them. And '65 was going to be the year that we got these cars. And this is about '63, it's usually a couple years ahead. And we got all the body styles just like we wanted, except that we'd come up with a even hotter looking coupe than the one that was sold. And I had done that car in my studio. So he had me over there setting up the car, and he was going to bring John Gordon in, who was the president of General Motors. He had to sell this to him because it was late in the program. It would cost some extra work and overtime to get this car out. But he wanted to sell it very bad because it would be the umbrella of the whole group of cars. It was this gorgeous coupe. And finally I remember Mr. Gordon walking in. He was so conservative and so stodgy. I was worried sick. And he looked at the cars and he was thinking about how late we were. And he said, "Nah, Bill, we can't be doing this. It's too late. They both look about the same to me." And Bill says, "The same? That's like saying Chicago and Paris are the same. They both got a river running through them." You can't really understand what it was like, what a joy it was to work for a man like this. He was so exciting. Think about this as a young man, and I was working in Cadillac studio on the new cars with those fins and all that. And here in 1959, his racing car was done. He's secretly got this car running under a different name. And you'd go on weekends to Elkhart Lake or wherever it might have been racing and watch it race against the best in the country. Here's this beautiful new shape, your boss's car. And then Monday you go back to work doing designs for new cars. It was like heaven. I couldn't wait to get to work. I couldn't wait to go to the races on the weekends. It was just, I thought I died and gone to heaven. After Harley Earl left, Bill sort of formed his own team of designers that he was were sympathetic to his type of designs and were up to date on that. And a lot of young people got wonderful positions as a result of that, you know. The group, when I first started, the average age was about 30 years old. He remembered he started running Cadillac at 25. Mm-hmm. And so 30, he didn't think that was too young at all. Of course, we didn't either. We thought it was great. But he did have the youngest team running all those studios. And the good thing that was there, though, was because he had a watchful eye. And we would have made some mistakes if it hadn't been for Bill. But he'd watch you, and when you get too far out of the bend, he'd pull you back. And but he liked that. He'd rather have a guy going out too far all the time that he had to pull back than when he had to keep pushing to get something new out of. And that's what he wasn't getting with some of the old group. His new group was always a little ahead of him, and that's the way he liked it. Irv Rapicki was in that group, and Chuck Jordan, and myself, and Stan Weiland, and it was really a strong group of very competitive people. We were all very competitive amongst ourselves, and it was what Bill wanted, and he liked that way, and he nursed that, make sure everybody was a little on edge. He would do this purposely, because you'd be selling a new front end, showing him here's the new front, Bill, and he'd look at it and all, and he just came in from Cadillac studio. He says, "You know," he says, "those guys next door are catching up with you." Boy, you know you weren't hot enough. He didn't have to say you weren't hot enough. Through the years, we had been designing every type of car, from Corvette sports cars to pedestrian four-door sedans, right through limousines. One car, other than the Corvair, which wasn't really quite that too small a car, but we had to get into some world products that were really small cars, and some that were eventually supposedly to be sold in America. And that's one thing Bill was never at ease with. He really didn't like these little cars that much. And you'd bring him out to show him what you're doing, he kind of paw at the floor a little, and he'd say, "Well, it's like a dwarf. It's like tailoring a dwarf. I guess it's all right." It's just like World War II. That's what it's like. He says, you come home, and he says, all the candy bars are half the size and twice the money. I really thought about, there's so many of the stories I can't tell.
I know.
You know, he was a really funny guy, and his jokes were just a riot, and stories, but you just can't put them on TV. I just love the one where he says, Guy goes in the brothel, and he says, girl looks at him, he's taking his clothes off, threw him out of the window. I said, what'd you do that for? He says, hell, they're going to be out of style before I get out of here. When I returned to a GM after working at Opel, I had a number of assignments. But some of those first years, it was hard finding the niche, just exactly where you worked out the best. But the most interesting assignment I had was when I was put in charge of all the advanced studios, and I reorganized them in a little different way. Earlier, the advanced studios were always doing something kind of strange, and very little was done down there could get used on a production car. And it was frustrating to the production chief. So I tried to do programs down there that were a little more oriented, that eventually could find their way into production. And it was very gratifying to have people excited about what you're doing, instead of disliking it, and in some cases hating it. They could identify with it, and they knew that they might get something like that, and that was appealing to them. And I personally started the aerodynamics studio at Styling, because we had a wind tunnel going in, and nobody was very excited about it. But I knew that that was coming, because I'd been in Europe where speed was incredibly important for the small displacement engines that everybody had. And when you got a new Opel, and if it wasn't faster than the old Opel, something was wrong, and they weren't going to buy that car. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, you could only do it through body shape, because you couldn't just keep making the engines bigger, because they used up too much fuel, and gasoline was $4.50 a gallon. Mm-hmm. So it became a more sophisticated thing over there, and you had to learn to work with it, and eventually it became something that you rather enjoyed, and your product became more sophisticated. So we did a lot of work there with the wind tunnel engineers, and I started a studio that was headed by Ron Hill, who is now head of industrial design out at Art Center. And he was a very, very technically interesting guy too. He loved it, and we got a lot of cars done that surprised people. We did when the front wheel drive Citation first came out. It was a very good car, but a very ordinary body. Mm-hmm. And I remember that you could talk about this gas mileage and that gas mileage. You know, it got 9.5 miles an hour better, but you couldn't get anybody excited for some reason. And the thing that we couldn't put in the press was the thing that excited most of the people, is the car in stock form was a 93 mile an hour car, and our Aero sedan was 128. Now that impressed people, and started getting more and more in the mood for this. And it gathered, it was not just cars, but trucks. And we started some of the early Aero truck stuff that all the truck manufacturers have picked up. Now you see every truck running down the highways got aerodynamic fixes on it, you know. But we started a lot of that very, very early in General Motors, and that was a lot of fun. We did it for trains too. Santa Fe worked on some streamlined train fixes with us in our wind tunnel. So we were making that wind tunnel work for us. It was just an off-the-cover thing, but it was an interesting project. Mm-hmm. When Chuck Jordan was put in charge of design, I became director of design. It was the position that he used to hold, and worked with all car studios and truck studios from that point on, and it was a wonderful experience. It was all the fun you had at Opel, but lots more cars to do. Since retiring, I've remained active with automobiles in that I still am designing some cars on a specified setup, not in competition with General Motors or anything like that. But I'm also involved with the concours at Meadowbrook and at Pebble Beach. I'm in charge of the judging for both of those events. And I've always loved history of automobiles. In fact, so much so that Mike Lamb and I finally have gotten a book out on the history of automobile design. We did that because of the 100-year anniversary. What perfect timing. The automobile in 1996 is 100 years old, and we'll do a book on the history of the style in the first 100 years, and we'll call the book Century of Style. So that all worked out terrific. It's a lot of work, but I'm very proud of it. They say, you're a historian. Well, I guess I am a historian, but I became interested in other older cars and all, not so much for the history, as they were fascinating to me. How good looking some of them were and how horrid some of them were, done in the same time frame. And it just became extremely interesting to me. Some of them that were done, I could tell in the early 50s, we never bettered. And you said, my God, you can really learn from this stuff. If you look at all these stuff, all the mistakes that were made trying to go down on that road, and how people missed this and never really did that right. And I think like Army generals have a tendency to study battles and all that, so they understand more why that was successful or unsuccessful. And that was the way the history was with me. It was just a more of an interesting and exciting evaluation of things that had gone on in the automobile industry before, and who had done it. And eventually, I got a chance to meet a lot of these people, especially in the 50s, because they were all alive then. The automobile industry was only 50 years old at World War II time. So, a lot of the people were very much alive and active, and I had a chance to talk with them, and I found that very interesting. Now, this book is written about the first 100 years of the automobile. Right. And many people ask me, what do you think about the cars now, and what's going to happen in the future and all that stuff, and that's an interesting subject. As we get later and later into this century, the demands put on the designer from safety, impact, emissions, all the other stuff of the cars has become far, far greater than it ever was in the times when we worked on cars. And the restraints as far as cost of building and all that, and the competition from the Far East as well as Europe are a great deal greater. And I would hope that as we get this straightened out and the quality is up on every car now, American or German or Japanese, you can't hardly take the name tags off. You can't hardly tell the difference quality-wise, so they're doing their job there. Now I think it's just time to get back to the styling again, because that's what sells cars. When you got all these great cars that run right, look right, are excellent performers, excellent economy, then once again we're going to be back to a car that is really a beautiful looking car. And it's taken a while for them to start realizing it, but it's starting. And I think I look forward to the next decade and next couple decades of seeing something really great come out. I hope so, anyway.